We're talking today with Duane Harvey of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, Duane, can you give us some background on yourself? To begin with, kind of where and when were you born?
I was born in Smelter City, Oklahoma, which is a small next-door neighbor to Henrietta. And if you look on the map or whatnot, you will see Henrietta, but not Smelter City.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born in the 1920s. I grew up in the Depression years of the 1930s.
And what year in 1920 you were born?
1924.
24, okay.
24.
And what was your family doing for a living when you were growing up?
My father worked at the Eagle Pitcher zinc smelter. And the smelter spelled it Spelter.
Okay.
So that's how I got, and grew up this little place there next door to the smelter, which was Smelter City.
Right. Okay. And did he keep his job in the Depression, or did?
They worked part-time during the Depression. And then he did any number of odd things that he could to make a dollar.
Okay. Was this an area that had oil fields, or was that not
No,
where you worked?
No.
Okay.
No. The economy was farming, along with the zinc smelter. Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company had a plate glass factory there. There were coal mines, a few coal mines. So that was the essential economy of the town.
Now were you affected by the Dust Bowl or any of those conditions?
Well, eastern Oklahoma is hill country.
Yeah.
So wooded. So consequently, other than some dusty days, we did not have the dust storms that you commonly see in pictures when they speak of the Dust Bowl.
Right.
Here's a big cloud of dust coming through. That was western Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas.
Yeah.
So we did not have that as such.
Right. Okay. And then did you kind of stay in the same place while you were growing up?
Stayed in the same town. We rented houses. Father rented one place, then another place, and so we lived. Henrietta at that time was approximately 7,000 population, so we lived all over town for a few years.
Okay.
Each residence.
And how many kids were in your family?
I had two older brothers and a sister. I was the youngest. I was the baby of the family.
All right. Now, what kind of schooling did you have?
Very common schooling at that time. When you become 6, you entered grade school. You went 2 years of junior high, and then 4 years of high school.
Okay, so you finished high school?
Yes.
Okay. Because in those days, not everybody did.
Well, I say yes, we did, because I really can't recall kids dropping out of school.
Well, that was probably, there were different state laws. So in Michigan, they had to go through the 8th grade, and that was all. But if in Oklahoma, they wanted you to go to high school, then that's what you did.
Yes.
But anyway, so you finished high school. So what year did you finish high school?
1943.
All right. And now, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, yes.
How did you learn about it?
Well, naturally, very hard question to answer, because at that time, whether heard it on the radio or just from the kids, when something happened, why everybody was out talking about it.
Yeah.
So.
Now, did you listen to the president on the radio that night? Or?
Well, I'm not sure they had a radio.
Yeah, if you didn't have a radio, that'd be tough, yeah. Okay. All right. But basically, it was just something that the news just took off.
Yes.
And so everybody knew. Okay. Now, what was your reaction to that? Had you been paying any attention to what was happening in the world, or was this just...
Well, we were aware that the war was going over in Europe. The Germans, France had fell. So, yes, we had the local newspaper. So consequently, you kept up with those sort of things.
And were you expecting that we might get into this?
Oh, no, not at, see, that was 17, it's just
Yeah.
on, so, no, that was,
Right, okay.
no.
All right. Now, once Pearl Harbor happened now, I mean, you're still in school, but guys your age and a little older start to go in the service. Uh,
Well, when Pearl Harbor, well, yes, then we were at war, and naturally they had started mobilizing. They needed to enlarge, and they started immediately a lot of people went down and enlisted in the service, branch which they wished, and there was like the National Guard units were reserves,
Mhm.
which a few people was in. Why they were called up, so there was a little gradual drain
right.
of the young people.
Okay. Now, did you consider enlisting yourself?
No,
Why not?
well, I was 17,
Okay.
and so that was senior in high school, and no.
Okay. Because you could get in at 17 if your parents signed for you, but yeah, that's how it worked.
Well, I'm not sure about the Army and
Oh, yeah.
the Navy.
No, all services.
There. But no, I can't recall anyone.
Okay. But did you figure that sooner or later you were going to go in?
Naturally, seeing 42, well, the draft was on.
Yeah.
So people were being drafted, so you know then sooner or later you were going to be drafted. And then in 42, when Roosevelt lowered the draft age to 18,
Mm-hmm.
why, as soon as you reach 18, you were drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And consequently, the draft boards had a quota to fill. And if you enlisted, why, you were out of the pool, and but they had to fill their quota. So that eventually the young people, but then they had to start reaching up to get the older, the fathers and so forth. So no, you knew that it was just a matter when you reached 18. Why, it was just a matter of months till you was going to be drafted.
All right.
So you just sat back and.
Okay. Do you remember when you got your draft notice?
Well, you just automatically, that was when you turned 18, you went to the draft board
Right.
and registered.
Right.
And then they gave you a classification and on. And all right, the kids I started degree school with, see, I was with in school all along. So here all of us as seniors, as we become 18, we registered, and we got a deferment, had different classes, and then for 30, 60 days, when that deferment was up, why, draft board would class you 1A, which is eligible for the draft, and then they just let our papers lay on the table till we graduated.
Mm-hmm.
So kids that I started the first grade with, we went to the service with.
All right. So now, when did you actually report for basic training?
I can't remember the exact months, but I'd say July,
Okay, so summer of 43 then?
yes.
So right after you're out of school. Okay. And where did you go for basic training?
I was inducted at Fort Sill, and where we took aptitude tests and all to determine which services of the Army we would go to. I went to Aberdeen Proving Ground, which was ordnance,
Mm-hmm.
and at that time, the Army had established replacement training camps. So there was replacement training camps for the infantry, the ordnance, transportation, finance, artillery, engineers, all branches of the Army. They all had their replacement training centers. So you went to the replacement training center for your basic training. And then specialized training that, and then you'd put into, let's say, the pipeline and send.
Okay. Now, when you first arrive for basic training, have they sorted you out yet, or are you all together in the beginning?
Now, what do you mean sort out?
Well, deciding who's going to go into finance and who's going to go into artillery.
Oh, no, that's,
Yeah. Okay.
that's done at the induction center.
Right.
And then, where you reported, they issued all your clothes and everything. And that's when you took your aptitude test.
Right.
And that determined
Okay.
what branch it is going to put you in.
Okay. And what branch did they assign you to?
Ordnance.
Okay. So it's artillery and weapons and
Well.
or weapons maintenance. Well, I guess describe a little bit the training. First of all, when you arrive there at the training center, what kind of reception do you get? What happens?
Well, you arrive there and they put you in barracks and you're assigned to a regiment or a company, platoon and on. So you're immediately that's the way you're assigned. They just ship you in, and they've got initially I think basic training was I don't know, 8 weeks, and then as the war progressed, while they reduced it, it might have been started out 12 to 8 and down, and so you had here a whole regiment of replacements, and when they replaced that, well, here was a new group come in,
Right.
and they just put you in the.
Yeah. Now, in the first weeks when you're in training, what do they make you do?
Well, the typical morning was you had to learn how to march and drill. So your time was taken up with here's how you march, here's how you do your manual of arms. So you learned all of your basic Army procedures. And so from you in the morning, you tapped, you went to march to breakfast, you marched back, you started out with physical training and drill, and that was just progressed on, and then you went manual of arms, how to fire, and eventually qualified on the rifle range, and till you.
Now, how much emphasis was there on discipline?
Oh, that's entirely different from what it is today. Discipline was very strict on.
Now, what would happen if you messed up?
Well, this all depends on what kind of let's say your platoon sergeant on, and if you all right, you can have different ways of disciplining men. In other words, you can have them drop out and say push-ups, or you'd find yourself on KP, extra duty. So it was different ways of how that sergeant wanted to inflict the discipline measures upon you.
Right.
And some of that would also be determined by, say, the company commander. What kind of a company did he want? What did he want sergeants? Did he want them to be friendly, or did he want them to be hard-boiled? And when first introduction to the platoon sergeant I was in, his remarks was, "My name is Sergeant X, and you're going to hate my guts, but I don't give a shit." And that was his attitude, and that's the way he ran his platoon.
Okay. How easy was it for you to adjust to life in the Army?
That was very easy. It was easy for all of us because they're growing up in the 30s. Why, we didn't, see, our meals were very simple. We didn't have Cokes, or that, if you had one, well, that was something very special. You didn't have money given out, do you? And so that transition was very easy.
Okay.
First time I ever had an overcoat was when I went to the service. First time I ever had 2 new pair of shoes was when I went to the service. I had more clothes there than I'd ever had in my life.
Okay. And what about the part where you had to follow orders?
Well, there, you know, we went to school. Why, started off in the 1st grade. You learn to obey, and you learn to obey at home. And if you disobeyed, you got punished. So going into the service wasn't any real change in our environment, our life.
Okay. Now, the guys you were training with, were they mostly from Middle America, or were they from all over the place?
Oh, they were all over the place, because they're, you met people, kids from big cities, from New York, Chicago, California. Once again, we were all thrown in, not only from geographically, but they're in a small town. Why, we didn't have that many ethnic groups. So here we come up and you come in contact with Poles, Italians, Jewish, people of different religions, different backgrounds, and on. We're in a small town. Small one. Now, the kids from the bigger cities, they had all these ethnic backgrounds, connections. We didn't, coming from little towns.
Now, did you make friends with those guys, or did the guys from the same area get together, or what happens?
Well, you have to remember that when you're assigned to a platoon, you're a squad, and you have a fellow in the first squad in front of you when you're in your ranks. You got one in back, you got one on your right, you got one on your left. Every place you go, you're between those people, so on. You learn the names and you mix, but essentially you're in a slot and you stay in that slot. You fall out, you all fall out in that spot. You go to the mess hall, you march to the mess hall, and there they are, front, back, and on. Now, to a certain extent, maybe in the evening, why, there's a certain bit of mix, but you know the fellows in your company, you gradually learn their names, the platoons, but the training was very intense, and you didn't have much time to yourself, so you were, as I say, very, you were put in a slot and you stayed in that slot.
So you're just focused on getting through.
Yes.
Okay. Now, as you move forward, now you get some more specialized training. What did the ordnance training consist of?
Well, there again, they had, mine was as an artificer, small arms specialist. And then there was those that went to school for field artillery, the cannons. There was those that went to automobile repair. There was those for tanks. So the different services, they were different parts of the different units. So you entirely, when you got to finish your basic training, you went to specialized training, you went to another, you was in another group on. Now, another company. So there was entirely a new group, but you were still in a platoon, and just had the fellow in front of you was different, the fellow at the back, and the fellow on your right, the fellow on your left.
Sure.
So,
now, how long did you spend training?
Well, we let's say our training was such that 8, 12 weeks on, but within that time, we then went to Fort Meade. We were on a specialized group that was sent there to do some work in there. Then we come back, we went on field maneuvers, back again. I was sent to cadre school for non-com training, and so there was another school. So it was just
Yeah. And where did you go for the non-com training? Was that still?
That's Aberdeen Proving.
Still Aberdeen, okay. And the non-com training, what did that consist of?
Well, there again, how do you train recruits? What do you do? Yes, you learn, let's say, command and on. So you learn how to, let's say, also teach.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what you were doing. You had to teach them how to march, how to drill, and on.
Okay. And then once you finished the cadre training, did you become a drill instructor, or what did they do with you?
I went in one day to the orderly room and said, I do not wish to train recruits. You can send me overseas to fight. So then I was transferred out, and there, one place along the way, they said, you never had any training in street fighting. So I was sent down to where they had a constructed building to learn how to do street fighting. And they kind of forgot me, and so I stayed there, but eventually, well, I was transferred in and pumped along, I'll say, the pipeline from one place to there to camp in Pennsylvania, where they collected people before they sent them to the port of embarkation, which was New York, and right outside of New York City. Eventually put on a troop ship and sent to England.
Okay. Now, when did they send you to England?
In May of '44.
All right.
I got there just before D-Day.
Okay. Now, during the time when you're training, because that's 9 months, 10 months, something like that, did you ever get to go home?
We got a furlough before we shipped overseas.
Okay.
2-week furlough. Weekend passes or passes outside, I had maybe 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go off base. They didn't that. If you Sunday, let's say, which was to be a day off, if you didn't go to church services or someplace, you went out and you drilled. So you soon learn how to work the system and to get out of certain duties. So you didn't hang around. You left, because if you stayed there, you were going to be given some kind of assignment,
Right.
Something to do.
Now, would you go to church, or did you find something else to do?
I did something else.
Okay.
I just
All right, so you did learn that part of the system. Now, all of this time, are you assigned to any permanent unit, or are you still just in
no.
kind of just a training status?
You're just a trainee.
All right. Okay, so now you ship over in May of '44. What kind of boat were you on?
Was on what was in civilian, it had been the SS Argentina,
Okay.
which plied between New York and South America.
Now, did that ship sail by itself, or was it a convoy?
Oh no, they were all in convoys. Actually, the only ship that sailed by itself was the Queen Mary.
Right.
And because it was fast enough that they could supposedly outrun the sub, and it was too big and slow to plod along for 2 weeks.
Right.
when they could do it in 7 days.
So what was the weather like when you made the crossing?
It was summertime, so there was no rough weather. Now, you also got to realize that at night, as soon as it becomes sundown, they put everybody below decks. Nobody was allowed on deck. And during the daytime, you could go up on deck, but there was 10,000 other people on that boat, so there wasn't much to do. They had canvas hammocks with about this much space in between with all your gear and everything. So you could lay in between there and get up, go up top on deck, and then pretty soon there wasn't anything there except you looked out and there was ships there and you went back down.
Yeah. Now, did a lot of the guys get seasick?
I don't recall anyone being seasick.
Okay. So good weather is a good thing. Did you have any U-boat scares?
Any what?
U-boat scares?
No, I'd say at night when he was down in the hole, you maybe could hear a distant boom, or I'm not sure whether you heard it or imagined it.
Mm-hmm. But otherwise, it went smoothly enough. Do you remember where you landed in England or Scotland?
Practically all of them came north around Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
and into Glasgow.
Yep.
And discharged, and then they would either send them by rail or take a small ship or a ferry and down from Glasgow to Liverpool, or one of the channel ports between
Okay.
there and Ireland.
All right. And so, what happened to you when you landed? So you landed in Glasgow,
Well,
or where'd you go?
The ship
Yeah.
docked, didn't
Yeah.
dock. It was anchored in the river,
Right.
the bay there, and then they were ferried to shore.
Mm-hmm.
But I stayed on the ship for several days, and then took a old ferry down to Liverpool,
Mm-hmm.
and then was shipped to a place near Birmingham. While I was there was when D-Day occurred. The group I was with was artificers. We were familiar with small arms, so they sent us to what was called Litchfield Barracks, and they were afraid at that time, when the D-Day occurred, that the Germans would have attacked the camps in England to disrupt. So they established anti-aircraft on. So since the group of men I was with were artificers, we knew about machine guns. Well, we were assigned to the anti-aircraft defense of the 10th Replacement Depot at Litchfield Barracks, which consisted of a 50 caliber machine gun, which was inoperable, and we didn't have a round of ammunition, but we had a man on 50 caliber, round the clock, round the week, round the month. So we manned that. You'll have to get a book called Litchfield Trials, and read about it, because this is about the 10th Replacement Depot, who was commanded by a colonel, and that was Old Army. Run a brig where several of the Army people in the brig were died of brutal treatment and all, and but that's as I say, that's just for a historian
Right.
to get and read there. So that was there. Meanwhile, there was a lot of people being killed in Normandy. While they had people in the United States, they needed riflemen now. So in England, they had all of these replacements. So they sent them down to a camp on Salisbury Plain for 4 weeks of rehearsal infantry training. So they cleaned out let's say the ordnance, the transportation, the cooks and everybody, waiters and everybody, to send them down and say, here's how you shoot a rifle, and on to send to France. So to about the end of the 4th week, why, officers from the 501st Parachute Training came around and wanted volunteers. And my piston vinegar that I had back in Aberdeen evaporated by then, because I thought, hey, they're killing people over there. They moved all these troops out of England. The bars, I say the bars, the pubs weren't as full. There was more beer available. The competition for the girls was less. And I thought, this is a pretty good place to stay. If I volunteer for the paratroops, I'll get $50 more a month for doing the same thing that I'm going to do otherwise. And I'll get to stay here another 3 or 4 weeks. So I stuck up my hand and volunteered. The 101st Airborne Division had a jump school in England where they trained paratroopers. It was much shorter than training than what they did at Toccoa, Georgia. And the school, if you've read The Band of Brothers, why, you've heard of or read about Captain Sobel. And this school was run by Captain Sobel.
Oh my.
And so I took my paratroop training under Captain Sobel.
Right. Now, what did you think of Captain Sobel?
Well, he never bothered us or anything. Now the sergeants, there again, the facilities, our training facilities for parachute jumping was they had a B-17 fuselage that they cut the hole up in the front and the hole back in the back, and we ran in the front and down the fuselage and jumped out and tumbled on the ground and run around, back again. We'd do the same thing. Had a platform about 6 feet tall. We put our hands up and we jumped off and acted like we was pulling rigging and tumble, run around and tumble. Then we drilled. The sergeants there once again. Paratroop training, wherever it was, they you volunteered, but they wanted you to say quit. They wanted to force you out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we drilled all morning long, physical exercise, and then we double time, 5 to 7 miles. You didn't stop, no matter how you could double time till you keeled over. But if you just double time and said, I'll quit, why, you were through.
Mm-hmm.
So they, in effect, what I say is, people today, when I say the paratroopers, they took these volunteers, but the training was such that only the cream came to the top, and they threw the skim milk away.
All right.
So the troopers were very special and elite from that standpoint.
Okay. Now, of the group that you started training with, what proportion of them finished?
I cannot say, because of people, person, they constantly said, if you don't want to do this, well, just go down to the orderly room, tell them you quit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did that, well, they said, go pack your bag, come back. By the time you packed your bag and got there, they had a Jeep waiting for you, and they hauled you away, because they didn't want anybody contaminating the rest. So.
But were there a lot of guys who washed out?
Oh, there was, I don't know if a lot, because there wasn't that many, you
Okay.
know, where, again, you look at a military man, somebody in uniform today, woman, man, they've all got wings on, all paratroop training. Now, but back then, Probably in World War II, the maximum paratroopers, sometimes when I thought couldn't have been more than 50,000 the entire war, Pacific and on.
Okay.
So it was very, very few of the Army out of 9 million men, a very small group, and they were elite.
Okay. Now, did they actually have you jump out of airplanes when you were training?
All right, as I said a while ago, in the morning, we did physical training. Afternoon, we went down and learned how to pack a parachute. And so we packed 5 parachutes. And so about the second week, nice weather, why, we got a parachute, climbed on a 6x6, went out the airport, climbed on a C-47. He took off 800 feet. We jumped out. Got another chute and got on 6x6, went out to the airport, climbed on the plane again. He flew over a little lower and we jumped out. So I made all my jumps, qualifying jumps, of 5 in one day.
Now, were guys getting hurt on those jumps? Could they twist ankles and break things?
The injuries always involved in jumping on. People jump from airplanes now, from towers, cliffs, everything else. But back then, there wasn't that many aircraft available. They needed them for other uses. So consequently, there was people who, I didn't jump for over a year. And after the war was over, why, we got a new commander, and he said, all right, you're drawing your jump pay, and you're gonna have to jump. And we all knew we were headed for home and discharged. So among the fellows that's gonna be jumping, and he said, this will be an easy jump. It'll be from 1,700 feet, which is a high altitude for jumping, and no equipment, so very simple jump. But the talk among the paratroopers was, are you going to jump? And oh, no, I'm not going to jump, because I don't want to break a leg when I'm going to get discharged and then be forced to stay in the Army while another 6 months while I heal. And so some of them says no, they lost their jump pay, but they got to stay in the unit. I and the rest of the 17 of us or so in the unit says, no, we're going to jump. So we jumped.
All right. So you go and you've taken your jump training. At this point now, do you get assigned to a particular unit in the 501st?
Well, all right. We were sent to, at that time, the 501 was still in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
But the Army never replaced either the 101st or the 82nd. They didn't send any replacements in to the units. The 101st and the 82nd were the only American units which fought in Holland, and because that was a British operation, and they had to put those 2 divisions under British control. And Montgomery, naturally, here he had 2 divisions, extra divisions, and he wasn't about to turn loose. My thought was the Army didn't reman those units. They were constantly losing men on until they could say, look, you've got to turn those units back to us because we've got to reman them, re-equip them, retrain them, and we can't do this with their under your control. So they came back. At that time, we had already gone to Mourmelon, France,
Mm-hmm.
and when the unit came back, and then they put us into different companies. Now I happened to assigned B Company, and before I went to Bastogne, here I got transferred to Headquarters Company into the S2 squad.
Now, so you joined B Company and you're just with them for like a couple of weeks? Or?
A couple of weeks.
Okay. And then why did you get transferred to Headquarters Company?
Well, that's just the way they selected. They needed men in the S2 squad. They didn't have any.
Okay.
And so there was only 2 men in that. All the rest of them had been casualties. So they needed men in the S2 squad. So.
Okay. And can you explain what an S2 squad was?
Well, that was, we manned the observation post and took care of the prisoners that was been attacked. They were, let's say, the intelligence unit, the interrogation. We moved them back. So that was a squad within each battalion.
Okay. And then you go in and you join them, so there's just 2 guys there who have been there. Do they make any effort to teach you the ropes or tell you what to do?
Well, we went right into combat.
Hmm.
So that's, yeah.
Now, describe a little bit just sort of what you saw or what happens to you. You get to Mourmelon, you get assigned, you're there a little bit, you get assigned to the Headquarters Company. How did you find out you were moving? Or
well, when we had the reveille Monday morning, why, when we fell out, ordinarily the first sergeant comes out and says, asks for the morning report, and the platoon sergeant says the first platoon all present and counting for, and he'd be covering up for the fellow that took off, went to town, hadn't got back yet. The other fellow that was drunk, still in his bunk. But that morning, instead of just calling for a report, the first sergeant called the roll, and you had to answer. Then he read the Article of War against desertion, and said, if you leave now while you're deserting and face the enemy and on, said, go eat breakfast, come back, pack your bags, dress warm, and get ready. So we ate breakfast. I came back, and I had on my cotton pants, I don't know what else, the regular just uniform. I came back, put on wool long handles, put on my wool top, OD shirt, OD pants. Then they had a wool sweater. They had what they called M42 uniform, which is trousers and a combat unit. I put those on. I was lucky. I had a pair of boots, overshoes. I put those on, and then I had a scarf and an overcoat and a little wool beanie.
okay.
And I put my webbing gear on. Didn't have a rifle, and so then that's what I went into combat with.
Now, did a lot of the men in the line units not have as much by way of warm clothing, or?
There was fellows that was climbing on the truck, still had cotton uniforms. Very, very ill prepared.
Mm-hmm. All right. And do you remember anything about the ride out to Bastogne?
Well, do you remember that we got aboard semi-trailer trucks with sides on them, and we were packed in, stood up, and they took off. Along the way, why, some of the French people threw some apples on, and so we got off. We reached Mandy Saint-Etienne about midnight or though, and unloaded. I laid down on the ground. There's little patches of snow here and yonder, and 'cause we hadn't had sleep. Then the next morning, why, the sergeant said, wait here till I send for you. And then the battalion, A Company, the 1st Battalion of 501, they led off for the attack to meet the Germans. And then that evening, Lieutenant come along. Meanwhile, as I wandered around waiting for him, I come across where they was digging in a cannon, and a fellow digging down the hole with his M1 was laying up on the ground, and as I walked by, I reached down and stole his M1 rifle. So I had a rifle and 8 rounds of ammunition. And then that evening, Lieutenant Jones came by, picked a bunch of us, we got on a Jeep and went out to establish a roadblock southeast of Bastogne.
All right. Now, what was at the roadblock? Just your little group?
That was it. Well, there was a tank for the Sherman.
Okay.
So in our little group, and but nothing happened that night. So there was no attack on. And then the next morning, we got severely shelled. The lieutenant, another replacement, killed, and Captain Miller of C Company of the 327th came by. He took us, a small group of men, and so I spent the first week with C Company of the 327th Glider Instrument on the southeast quadrant. And
now, did the Germans keep coming in that direction, or did they leave you alone?
well, as I said, we were on the backside. And so as they come around Bastogne, where they come around and then join together to go on there. So they really never hit that one sector that I was in. Now, we read about the battle on Christmas Day between when the Germans had come out of the rear, backside of the Bulge, because they had been really attacking the front. They circled around the back. They didn't. They made a couple of probing attempts, but really did nothing until Christmas Day, and when they really made a heavy attack and almost broke through. But that was if you wasn't right at the sector I was in, it was maybe 1,000 yards down the way where they really had the battle.
Now, could you hear that from where you were?
Oh, you could hear cannon fire, all over.
Okay. Now, did you have much of an understanding of the situation you were in? Did you know that the Germans were all around you?
Oh, it's word of mouth why I come up that we were surrounded. Yeah, that is, you become aware of that. But there again, that was not unusual, because that was the whole thing about the paratroops. You were going to be behind the enemy lines. You weren't going to be in front, you're going to be behind them.
Right.
And the enemy territory. So in effect, we were in a similar situation that had been in Normandy, in Holland.
All right. Now, were you able to dig in, or did you just stay on the ground, or what did you do?
Well, you look, if you're in a static situation, you stop. As my father said, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And always says, old soldiers became old soldiers because they dug. And if you stop, you get you dig, because if you're below ground, why, let's say you're safe.
Right. Now, was the ground frozen, or did you have to?
It had snowed at that time, yes, but you picked away until you got down, and then on. And a lot of situations you could you'd find no foxhole and use that.
Okay. Now, how well did they keep you supplied while you were out there?
And with ammunition,
Ammunition, food, whatever?
well, first off, very, very poorly, because we only had what we took with us. And I had very little, but so you had a K ration or two, but you nibbled on that. Yeah.
Okay. And then how long? So how long did you stay with the 327?
Roughly a week.
Okay.
7, 8, 9, 10 days.
And then did you get sent back to your unit? Or?
Then sent back to the unit.
Okay. And did they wonder where you were?
Well, of course, I was new to the unit,
Mm-hmm.
but there again, I was reported wounded, and still have the telegram from my mother that sent saying your son, Private Duane K. Harvey, had been wounded in action, and further report will come from the hospital. Well, she got that first part of January, but it was a month later before she got another telegram rectifying the first one, saying they were in error and I hadn't been wounded and that. But I've often thought, what was my mother thinking for that month when
Right.
my hero had been reported wounded, and she had no word, was it bad, serious, or what, other than saying your son's been wounded and the hospital will notify you.
All right. Now, what did you want? No, you rejoined your unit. Did you actually go back to doing S2 squad work?
Oh,
or?
yes. No, we had to go. We'd man observation post, and they would be up, observation post, and they'd stay like 3 days or on, and then you'd get relieved, and we'd go back to the battalion headquarters and be there till we had to go up and relieve the other group and on. So there'd be about 3 of us in a foxhole or wherever we established our OP, and so we'd take a couple hours off and then 4 off and on, so we had somebody there, and so we set.
Okay.
Now, one of the things we did was we had a telephone or a line up to there, so we had a telephone, and back at the headquarters, the battalion headquarters, where the communications center was, why a fellow had a radio, so he'd turn the radio on and prop the phone up, and so we could hold our phone up and listen to the radio on. Now, the one thing that the line was in use, and if we had to talk to him, we couldn't ring him because of that. So you had to be very attentive to what was being done to get his attention if we needed to get his attention and say, hey, on. But so we would very often sit there and listen to it.
Okay. Now, while you were on observation post duty, did the Germans ever bother you?
Well, one time when we was in Alsace, well, we had a OP established in a barn up on Old Mill, and I was there, and I was watching a German cross the Motor River at the edge of the woods, and probably a sergeant checking his men there, and a lieutenant come up and says, wanted me to shoot him, and I said, no, I'm not going to shoot and disclose where I'm got this post, this OP at, because it was out in front of the lines. And so he went, got another fellow on, and they fired at him. Well, it was useless, he was way off. But at times you get a kind of live and let live situations. You arrive at, I'm not going to bother you, you don't bother me. So we all have a peaceful time. And so he had this fellow shoot. Well, it wasn't very long until there come a mortar round on this mill where we were to explode. And then an hour later, why, right on the dot, why, here would come another round. And so that evening, why, we moved our OP back to another place. But yeah,
Okay, let's go back to the time that you spent at Bastogne. Did anything else in particular happen there that you remember, or did it stay kind of quiet?
One of the things that there was the Countess of the Elde Hesse, and her castle home was outside of Bastogne, and the division headquarters at night would come out to stay there because the Germans were bombing Bastogne. C Company, that was in C Company sector, and so we'd be relieved every evening and every other evening, and we'd go back to the castle to provide protection, and then spend the day and go back up. So one of the days when I was passing time, why, as I walked around the castle yard, why, there was a Jeep there, and in the back seat there was a down sleeping bag that belonged to an officer. So as I walked by, I reached down and I picked up his down sleeping bag, and so I can truthfully say I was never cold at Bastogne.
At least not after that.
And I still have that sleeping bag in the basement on.
All right. Okay. So and the 101st doesn't stay there too long. In January, they move back out.
It was February.
February. Okay.
At the same time the Germans had the Battle of the Bulge, they lost, started another offensive down in Alsace,
Right.
so that to keep troops tied down there and on. So from Bastogne, they sent the 101st down to Alsace. So we finished the Battle of the Bulge in Alsace till March. Now, as I described what I put on in December, we got back to Mourmelon, the base camp, in March. Now, I had the same clothes I'd worn all that time. Whenever we came off the line, which the periodics rotated units back, you know, and I say the line maybe 600-700 yards back, you know, on why we shaved. They wanted to shave, so we did shave. During that December to March time, they trucked us down one time to where a quartermaster had established a tent and where you could take a shower. But they'd give you a little, you get wet with hot water, and then they turned the hot water off, and they was pumping out of a cold stream, and you didn't, you got wet, but that was about it. So that was the one time that we could say we got washed up, but you went back, put on your same clothes you'd had before, and all. So they talk about the paratroopers being elite troops and with their shiny boots and everything and on. But when we got back to Mourmelon, why, we were, let's say, a cruddy bunch of people. Hadn't had haircuts, hadn't had baths, hadn't done anything except we'd been in foxholes, had been in shelled out buildings wherever we could to find cover for that time, snow on. So, yes, they wasn't very long.
Okay.
But as soon as we got back, why, word come down immediately that you'll all get haircuts, you'll all get.
And what was morale like in the unit by the time you finished in Alsace? Or
Morale was always good.
okay.
Because there again, that was part of the esprit de corps. No.
All right. Now I'm using hour-long tapes, and this one. All right. Now we had gotten in your story kind of through the time spent in Bastogne, and then they move you over into Alsace, and so you're there kind of February into March. Now, during most of your time in the field at Bastogne or in Alsace, were you mostly staying in the same place, or did they move you around a lot?
We moved around because you always have, let's say, a reserve. So the regiment had 3 battalions. So if they had 2 battalions up on the line, or they had a battalion in reserve. Well, let's say here was the 1st battalion, or you'd have 2nd and 3rd up on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they would then rotate, or you may rotate up to the 2nd battalion's front, and they'd rotate back, and then maybe the next time they come up, or got rotated back or up, or you'd be up here to another battalion front. So while it was just a sector, why that sector was different from the other. So you.
But you weren't necessarily pushing the Germans back and advancing in their territory.
In Alsace, yes, we were more of a static situation.
Because there was a counterattack from Bastogne. We did eventually push outward from there.
Well, that was, see, one thing when we were surrounded at Bastogne, you were in a defensive position. And so it was the attackers who was coming in, all you that was stay in your holes and defend. And the one thing there, you say, I'm going to take care of my little sector right here, and I'll help the fellow on the right if he gets into trouble, or I'll help the fellow on the left and if he gets into trouble. But I'm going to do my part here. You knew he was going to do his part here, this fellow's going to do his part here. So you never you didn't get up and leave, you know, because your job was to take care of this, and that's what we were doing.
Right.
You know.
But once you got into January, some of the units in the 101st were attacking, and they were pushing the Germans back.
That's right. When they broke through,
right,
and again to resupply and everything and break through, that was what they call the Bojack Woods, and where we were doing the attacking, and the Germans were on the defensive and defending. So, yes.
Okay. And when your battalion was attacking, as someone in the S2 squad, what would you be doing?
We'd go along with them to take charge of the prisoners.
Okay.
And then we'd take them back to battalion where the interrogators were to be. And also, prisoners are a liability. They need to be watched on. So that takes manpower to do that. And so we, as the S2 squad, we took charge of the prisoners and would take them back. And so that the rifle companies, that fellow, he could go ahead and do his job.
Sure.
He didn't have to watch.
Now, what impression did you have of the German prisoners that you saw?
Well, they were Germans. They were Krauts. people would say, well, you're going to have an easy time. This unit in front of you is composed of old men and young boys. That didn't make any difference whether it was a SS man or a 15-year-old kid or a 60-year-old man. Whoever pulled the trigger of the bullet was just as deadly as that was there on that.
Now, did you notice whether they were men your age or older or younger?
No, they were just Germans. Yeah.
Okay, so you weren't really thinking of them in any other way at that
No.
point. Okay. Now, did the prisoners make any trouble, or did they just go along?
Well, that time you shook them down, they went along. Yeah. Now, one time there in the Bojack Woods, why we had 3 prisoners that we were taking back, and there was a bunch of paratroopers there spread along the trail in reserve, and one of them said, leave them here, you won't have to go back. We don't hear anything about this. You don't see, but what he was saying, you leave them here, I'll kill them, and you won't have to bother with them. You can go back and get it on. Well, we got to take them back to interrogation on that, but we killed prisoners.
Now, did you ever get any SS prisoners, or?
Well, there was another thing. I can never recall in all the training and the time I was in the Army that they ever had a class or taught anything about designations, in other words, rank. And here you could, what was a German non-com or prisoner, captain, lieutenant, colonel, general. Nobody ever explained any rank, insignias, or anything about this. They were just Germans on, which I can, I think was a mistake in the Army's part. And never thought about it until just a few years ago that, yes, they never, anywhere in the training, did we get any classes or anything in unit identification, rank identification of what they are. Now, the people back in the interrogation did, yes.
Yeah.
They were very
That was
well.
their job.
That was their job. But to the ordinary rifleman, no.
All right. Okay. So, you know, you've had now a fair amount of experience now in the field, sort of several months, and you're out there in the winter and getting shot at and so forth. And then you get through, and then you're in Alsace, and they finally pull you off the line, you go back to Mourmelon again. Now, did you stay there very long, or did you start moving again?
Well, see, by the time in March, why, the war was, coming to an end.
Right.
The 501st was only attached to the 101st Airborne Division, but they was considered an integral unit, but they were not assigned to it. They were only attached. When they sent the 101st back up on the line and on the Ruhr, the Battle of the Ruhr, the 501st Regiment stayed in Mourmelon for a specific purpose, and the Army was afraid as the Russians were coming in to Poland and on, they would, and also advancing, that they would start moving the POWs out and, or else shoot them, start massacre. One of the things in the S2 squad that we did at that time was we made the sand tables, and they'd give us a map, which really we did not identify, but a topographical map to show all the forests and the roads of a certain area. And so we'd take a sand table, and so we would look at the map and contour the dirt hills, and then we'd get some coal or something to delineate the roads and trees or whatever, to make a replica of that, so that when the time come, why they could bring the line companies in and show them this is the sector where we're going to drop on. So they had assigned in camps and several missions planned to drop on these camps. There was a group came in to meet with our battalion mess, big high-powered radios and communication equipment. They didn't associate with us. When they ate breakfast, they sat at their own table. They didn't talk to us or anything else. But they were there, communications inside to somebody that was aware of near those camps to say, hey, send them in, drop them on that. So that's where we wound up the war, was there at Mourmelon till the end.
Okay. Now, how much contact did you have with the civilian population in France or in England?
Well, England you had more because of they had no language difficulties. France was a somewhat little different, and in the language on you learn a few phrases and on that, and when we got to Mourmelon, Reims was only 10, 20 kilometers away. A bottle of champagne was a couple of dollars, but soon it was $20. That's the French loan. So really, we didn't have much. We didn't have any use for the French on that.
Now, would you have guys who would go into Paris and things? I mean, now that you're based in one place.
There again, you had to have passes. You couldn't. When we went to Reims, we didn't have pass. We just went out of the, wasn't any to the camp, just the tents, and so we slipped off and went. But if you got to Paris, why you needed a pass, and while they'd give a few, you didn't get places. You could no farther than what you could walk in the evening and get back to the thing. You didn't go far. No.
Okay.
You were, and there again, food was problems. So you ate in your mess halls. You go to town, maybe you could get something, but basically they had problems.
Yeah,
with,
they didn't have much.
The food, and so you on.
All right. Now, war ends. Germans surrender in May. Now, do you stay in one place, or do they move you into Germany, or what happens?
Oh, we was like the 101st was already in Germany, so they got a sector and down in around southern Germany, Berchtesgaden, and through there. Well, when after the war ended, well then they struck the 501st up to the division, and we occupied occupational duty for a short while, and we was over close to where the Russians were on. And then they'd moved from place. they instituted then the point system where they didn't need they did not need this many troops in the Pacific. So those been in the war, why they assigned a point system, and everybody with a certain number of points be discharged. They used, since the 501st was the regiment which was just attached, why it was chosen to be the vehicle in which to send these high pointers back. So they took the personnel from the 501st that were not high pointers, transferred them out to various units in the 101st. The men in the 101st who had enough points were transferred to the 501, and then they sent the 501st back. So in essence, the 501st Regiment ceased to exist after that.
Okay.
Now
what happened to you?
Well, I was assigned to the 81st AT Battalion, which was anti-tank, anti-aircraft battalion, which was a glider battalion. But I'll back up a couple sentences. They deactivated the 17th Airborne Division and then they transferred we got a lot of troops from the 17th Airborne into the 101st on. So then, and they were, 101st was scheduled to invade Japan. We was going there. So any number of divisions that was in Europe had been turned around and was on their way to Japan when VJ Day occurred. Well then, the mission of the 101st was no longer of value, so they deactivated the 101st in France and transferred us all to the 82nd. So I finished my career with the 82nd as a good many of the other 101st. And so we came back to the States, marched down Fifth Avenue in New York City to the Victory Parade, but with the 82nd.
Okay.
But we consider ourselves 101st.
Sure. Now, when did you get back to the States?
January of '46.
So you were in Germany for a while then?
Well.
Or in France, or?
Yeah, they established here again, they had to have places for troops to stay and collect from all over. So in France, they established what they call the cigarette camps.
Yes.
Because they were named after Camp Campbell, Camp Lucky Strike, and this, where they assembled and shipped. So from Germany, we came back through the cigarette camps to Southampton, and then sailed to Southampton on the Queen Mary.
But you did spend some time on occupation duty in Germany before that.
Yes.
And what impression did you have of the Germans at that point?
Well, there again, the war had just ended, so they were still Germans. They were still the bad guys, and that. So there was just like we still carried arms, and on. So as I said, while it was occupation, it was new enough at that time that there's no fraternization allowed, and which that all come around after we got back to the States. And
so things loosened up eventually, but not so much when you were there.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Now, if you think about the time that you spent in the different places in Europe, are there other things that kind of stand out in your memory, or events or things that you haven't brought into the story here yet?
A couple of things that as I mentioned earlier, why there was a kid by the name of Don Fair who graduated from high school, drafted, took his basic training, sent over to England as a replacement trainee, then to Mourmelon, into the 101st, just before we left for Bastogne. He got to Bastogne. He went out with us to establish the roadblock, and next morning when we got our artillery barrage, Don Fair was killed. So here was a 18-year-old kid out of high school, trained, sent in, killed. Never saw a German, never fired a rifle, never got fired at, except that barrage, the very first, and was killed. And I've often wondered, now, what about Don Fair? What would he have been today if he had been allowed? Complete waste of life. Never, in a way I want to say, never contributed to anything in the Army, but yet see, he was killed before he could do anything, without ever seeing the enemy. The other thing is that when we were Alsace, I got back from manning in relief, manning in OP, got back to the company, and the sergeant says, report back up to A Company. They're going to make a raid tonight across the Motor River, and you're to go with them. So went back up, reported to A Company, and they said, well, went up, and the Motor River was covered with ice, but they didn't know how thick it was. Could you walk across it, or how long? This was March. Had it gotten rotten? So they took pontoon boats, rafts, put on the ice. Then we put barn doors across to give us a treadway across the river. Then was to get an artillery barrage, and then they would walk it back. And so we'd follow the artillery barrage in. So when I got across, why, Lieutenant, since I was just sent up to be with the company, he had 6 brand new replacements. He came and he says, take charge of these, but keep them back. Nighttime is dangerous, fighting in the forest, the trees, who's enemy, who's on. So I took them and strung them out along path there in the snow. And the first man, I said, now, one of the riflemen, fighting up ahead, I says, you watch him. When he moves, you get up and follow him. And I went back to the second fellow and says, you watch that man in front of you. When he moves, you follow. And then I got to the rear, so I'd have them all in front. And pretty soon the first kid come running back and saying, they're gone, they're gone. And the attack had moved on, and he wasn't wearing. And so I gathered them up to take in, and there again, it's in the woods, and I thought, man, this is going to be hell, getting back into the group without getting friendly fire. Which when I started getting close, I started yelling at them that we were coming in. And so I got them back into the company ranks. This started at midnight, started getting daylight, and we needed to get back to our lines. So as we started back, why, here they were carrying a wounded soldier, and I picked up 3 POWs out of a foxhole, and so I took the 3 POWs, and which I was in charge of. So we took this wounded man and we carried him back to where we crossed the river. And when we got there, well, I put him on a barn door so we could carry him. And so I carried him back to the aid station. And when I got him to the aid station, why, the sergeant looked down and said, "He's dead." So I took my 3 prisoners back to the pit where they'd gathered others, and went back to the company. So happens to be that attack was the last bit of action we made. And so here was this fella killed at the very end. Years later, I met a fellow from Oklahoma in the airport to Wichita, Kansas, and we were talking, and I told about, and he was a sergeant in charge of the medic, and talking about bringing this wounded man back, and he's on the barn door, and he says, "They brought Gulick back on a barn door." And so 50 years later or so, I learned, here's the name of the man that I carried back.
Oh.
But like Don Fair, who was killed at the very instance, Gulick was a man that had dropped in Normandy, participated in Market Garden, participated in the Bulge and the Alsace, and was killed at the very last hour of our fighting. So I thought, just like Don Fair, what would happen to Gulick if he had survived that few hours? What would his life been like for the last 70 years? What would he have accomplished? Yes. This was the terrible part. What would have happened to these people? The other thing that I come upon, we had 16 million men in the armed forces, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. I know the USSR, or the Russians, or the communists, we've been at odds with all this time. But the Germans were always fighting on the Eastern Front. The Russians lost 16 million men. Every man that was in our service, they lost. Here was all the tanks they destroyed, all the airplanes they destroyed, all the Germans, and when I say Germans, they're speaking of the Germans, the Italians, the Bulgarians, the Romanians, and all of these companies that were fighting over there. If all those people and equipment had been available, we would have never gotten ashore in Normandy. And I just think we need to recognize, even not the communists, but we need to recognize what Russia.
Yeah, I think
I read a book one time, and S.L. Marshall wrote about the First World War, and he, the American Expeditionary Force, which fought in France, and we read and hear about and everything, at Reims, where right by Mourmelon, was where the Russians' Expeditionary Force fought in World War I. And in Marshall's book of World War I, he allocated a paragraph to what the Russians fighting on the Western Front all those years. And Mourmelon is a World War I Russian cemetery, which I was unaware of at the time.
I was not aware of that.
So I often thought, you know, we speak of the communists and detente and all such as this. We need to recognize the Russian soldier.
Yeah. The historical record does that. If you read up on it, that's part of it, and it's part of most classes and things like that now. But yeah, I guess to go back sort of here to your own experience now, you get discharged, you get enough points, you ship out, you come back to the States, and you land in New York. So you go Fifth Avenue and all of that kind of.
After we landed in New York, why we were to be discharged from service, went to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, which was an induction center, along with the center to discharge the veterans, return them in. At that time, January of '46, they were still drafting. And Camp Chaffee was an induction center for draftees. I walked through that camp and I looked and I thought, my God, these are kids. No, they were kids. And yet, I thought, I was 18 when I went in. I didn't think of myself as a kid. But I see, looking at these, that I was a kid. I've got two pictures. One, when I was in uniform, when I was private, first inducted, 18-year-old. I've got one taken in New York City when I was there, just gotten back, and hanging there. One, here's a kid, here's a man.
Mm-hmm.
So the war changed me from a kid, made me a man.
All right. Now, once you got out, what did you do?
Well, I went to university, and while I was going to college, I got married, had a family, and then worked.
Yeah. Now, if there hadn't been a war, would you have been able to go to college, do you think?
I'd say no. Colleges were small, they were very privileged.
Mm-hmm.
I say privileged to the extent that very few people went to college. Now, my brother, I had one brother who went to college, or was going to college when the National Guard, but let's say in college, there was the well-to-do who could pay it on, and then there was a class here of students who wanted an education and was willing to do anything to accomplish that education. They worked, they did everything possible to find the tuition. Let's say lived at a very low level on the expenses and on, and to get there. So I don't think I would have ever got to college. No, I'd come back, found a job someplace, and that would have been the rest of my life.
Okay. So when you went to college, then what kind of career did you go into?
I got married when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
I married a medical student, and she became a doctor. So consequently, I did a number of things through there. I worked something as while I studied geology. Why I had wife, kid, and so I some ways today, why they say, who's the wage earner in the family?
Mm-hmm.
Well, very common, the female is the higher earner, but back that time, no, that was not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little different experience there. So worked at a number of things, a number of different things, and on.
All right. So I guess to look back on the time that you spent in the service, you said they kind of made you grow up. What do you think you took out of that, or how did that help you later in life?
I really don't have an answer to that question because, see, in some ways, our life before the war as young was not an awful lot of difference than what our life was in the service. In other ways, it was an improvement on. So the service, I don't think, really affected that much now on.
Do you think you learned some things about other people or dealing with them?
Well, in that respect, yes, because there again, as mentioned early on, we lived in a very small group. We didn't have cars. We didn't do that travel on. And here, when you went to the service, why, you were thrown in with all of this mix. So yes, you learned there on the our schooling, our training, and there was had prepared us for Army on.
All right. Well, it makes for a good story, and I'd just like to close out here by thanking you for taking the time to tell it to me tonight.